Why do I say that diaphragmatic breathing is a myth? We're going to unravel that today and use it as a sort of jump off to get a little more clarity around what functional breathing really is. Welcome back to video number 5 in our functional breathing mini course. If you missed the earlier videos in this series, you can find the link for the entire playlist in the video description. If you're new to the channel, my name is Tara Bianca and I am a longtime holistic health practitioner and functional breathing coach. The term diaphragmatic breathing is a bit of a redundancy. We are always breathing with our diaphragms. The diaphragm is the primary muscle of respiration. You must use your diaphragm in order to breathe, so that means that you are always breathing diaphragmatically. So why then do we hear yoga teachers and breath coaches and meditation teachers constantly kind of hammering on this point of make sure you're breathing with your diaphragm? What are they actually trying to convey with this cue? I think they're trying to get you to draw more awareness to your belly, so the famous belly breath, which is used interchangeably with the term diaphragmatic breath. And in doing so, I think they're trying to get you to deepen your breath, a geographically deep breath, as I like to call it. And that's all fine and good. But the question becomes, is belly breathing really what you always want? Is it functional? And this leads us to the real topic that I want to get into today, which is what is functional breathing? Yes, this probably should have been video number 1 in this series, but for whatever reason, it only occurred to me to slip it in now. The real reason I'm bringing this up is that it actually came up in a workshop that I was teaching the other day, and I realized that my definition of functional breathing has really evolved over the years. So the purpose of this video is for me to simply share with you my current thinking on the topic. So I used to keep it very simple and structured for my students because honestly, that's the best entry point, right? You know, if you have too much information, it can be very overwhelming. And you guys also know that I am mostly an Oxygen Advantage and Biochecmical instructor. And so that's the primary lens through which I teach breathwork. And from that perspective, we very simply say that functional breathing is a few things. Number 1, it's nasal breathing. Non-negotiable. Number 2, it's deep breathing. And when we say deep, we mean geographically deep. So we're really focused on getting those ribs to move as a way of implying that the diaphragm is moving more optimally. Number 3, slow breathing. Well, what is that? That's a very relative term, right? So a big chunk of the people who I work with, especially if they're symptomatic, are breathing way too much. They're over breathing. They have a resting respiratory rate that is disproportionate to their metabolic demands. And this chronic long-term hyperventilation is causing disruptions in their biochemistry. And you can refer back to video number 1 in this series to hear a little bit more about that. And then number 4, Oxygen Advantage and Biochecmical people will tell you that light breathing or less breathing also equates to functional breathing. I teach about all of this extensively in my 4-week breath bootcamp. If you are interested, make sure you check out the link for my free training in the video description. So this is a great starting point, right? And all of these suggestions work really well, especially when we're talking about breathing for daily life and breathing for simple, ubiquitous daily activities. And when we're looking at things like anxiety, sleep disturbances, panic disorder, asthma, chronic rhinitis, allergies, lack of focus. If you're struggling with any of those things, you absolutely need to be breathing nose, slow, low, and light as much as possible throughout your entire day and during sleep. This makes a massive difference in your quality of life. But now, what happens when we start to turn up the intensity of our daily activities? Let's say we're doing a bunch of high intensity workouts, or maybe we suddenly find ourselves in a high stress emergency situation. Does the recipe stay the same? Do the recommendations shift at all? The short answer is yes. So in fairness, if you have been coached, including by me, to really focus on nasal, deep, slow, light breathing, well, first of all, it's always with the specific intention of eliciting a specific response in my students, but I can also see how for some people, this might create almost a little bit of neuroticism or rigidity in the breathing, which is not something we want, right? We want the breath to be expansive, not rigid. So what I'm about to say should be obvious intellectually, but I think some of you are getting a little too hung up on the rules when it comes to the actual practice. How you are breathing when you are resting, completely reposed on the floor, spine decompressing, belly relaxing, feeling safe, secure, and cradled by the earth is totally different than how you are breathing and even how you are recruiting your breath when you're running a 100-meter dash. Relaxed on the floor, you can easily breathe nasally, breathe deeply, full belly. It's very easy to slow your breath down to even 2 or 3 breaths per minute. You might be moving less than 6 liters of air per minute. And in that case, under those circumstances, that is totally functional breathing for that activity. And at the same time, that exact same breathing is completely dysfunctional when you're sprinting 100 meters. When you're sprinting, your goal is not to sedate your nervous system, go to sleep. Your goal is to generate power and speed. You need to move a lot more air. So elite athletes are sometimes breathing 100 liters or more per minute. You need a very tight core. You need to stabilize your spine. You need to coordinate your movement, which means absolutely none of this belly breathing. You're going to get a lot more rib expansion, including into that forgotten space of the posterior rib cage, which we spoke about a lot in the last 3 biomechanical videos. And the reverse is true as well. The breathing that you do during your sprint would be completely dysfunctional if you were trying to go to sleep. So an important thing to keep in mind, and we're going to get into this more next week when we start addressing the psychophysiological dimension of breathing, is that your breathing has a primary function in balancing the biochemistry of your body, and that was video number 1 of this series. Your breath also has a primary function in balancing the biomechanics of the body. That was videos 2 through 4 of this series. But it's important to remember that it also serves these other physiological and psychological functions in your body. The big one is this idea of self-regulation, right? This conscious control or conscious manipulation of the nervous system. Your breath is also implicated in speech and vocalization, communication. But then it also has all of these implications for cognition. So your breathing really affects memory, it affects learning, it affects attention, it affects perception, it impacts your thought patterns, your emotional patterns. It affects your expectation and your vigilance. So your breath is constantly interplaying with all of these other things in your body. So where does that leave us? I've been reshaping my definition of functional breathing to be more synonymous with flexible breathing, adaptive, variable, contextual. Functionality is not one strictly defined way of breathing. Rather, functionality is determined by your environment, your circumstances, and your metabolic demands. So, is your breathing optimal for your environment? Is it adaptive to the given circumstances? And is it perfectly aligned with your metabolic demands? If so, then it's functional. If not, it's maladaptive. When considering if your breathing is functional or not, context is super critical. So you should be able to completely change your breathing from lying motionless on the floor to sprinting. And both types of breathing, even though they are completely different, are perfectly functional for the given context. Elsa Gindler is known as one of the pioneers of somatic bodywork, and she was really big on sensory awareness, this idea of play, and movement exploration. Back in 1926, she wrote, "If we observe successful people, we can often see that they display a wonderful flexibility in reacting, in constantly changing from activity to rest. They have flexible breathing or functional breathing." This extends into the way that we hold ourselves and to the way that we move through space. So this thing that we call good posture might be functional and might be optimal for your physiology if you're just standing around on your 2 feet, peaceful, in the grass, no disturbances, no worries. But it's not going to be functional at all if you suddenly find yourself engaged in, say, a combat sport, right? What fighter do you know out there who's just standing around in this perfect balletic posture? It doesn't work. It's not functional for the given circumstances. What makes your movement functional is that it's flexible. And what makes your breathing functional is that it's flexible. So let's use me as an example again. We saw during my gait analysis in the last couple videos, the one that Verity did for me, that real flattening of the thoracic spine and consequently a lack of breath into the posterior rib cage, particularly on the left side. And now people who see me generally are very impressed by my posture. They tell me all the time, "Tara, you have such beautiful posture, you stand like a dancer, you move like a dancer." And yet what we're seeing here is a dysfunctional pattern that I'm stuck in, and it's killing my back, and it's impacting all of the organs that are innervated by those compromised areas of my spine. And so now, how did we get here, right? This posture didn't develop overnight. I'm gonna dive a little bit into my personal story here, but I think it's really relevant as we start to segue more into this psychophysiological aspect of breathing, so bear with me. How did we get here to this posture? My personal take on it is that you take a little girl who is so painfully shy. She has massive social anxiety. She has no idea how to talk to people, doesn't really have any friends. She's terrified of other people's judgment. She's terrified of doing something wrong. She's terrified of not being perfect. And you put her out into the world. And then you couple that with a dance background that had her in front of a mirror, scrutinizing her physique from the age of 2, comparing herself to the other 20 girls in the room, in a sport where your ability to excel is directly correlated to your physical perfection. And every teacher she ever had was screaming at her to suck in her stomach and lift up her chin and stick out her chest and roll her shoulders down. And there you go. I remember distinctly taking on this posture as a little girl in an attempt to imitate confidence. So sort of like a fake it till you make it approach, but I never quite made it. I'm still kind of faking my way through it. And so this posture you see, while some people might find it beautiful, is really a defense mechanism. This is the posture that allows me to navigate a room full of strangers and not freak out. And if you tried to break me out of this posture in the past, I would have probably crumbled. I don't think my nervous system would have been able to handle it. And I've been holding this defensive posture for so long that now that I am ready and I want to break out of it, it's hard. I'm stuck here. I'm frozen here. My breath is not moving, and so my body cannot move. And by the way, nor can my thoughts or my emotions. This posture is holding me frozen in a time when I was scared and uncomfortable as an insecure little girl. So functional breathing and functional movement doesn't mean finding and holding the perfect posture. It means you should be able to move through all the postures or any position without ever getting stuck in any particular one of them. Functional means you are flexible in your body, your mind, your thoughts, and your emotions. So as coaches and teachers, when we are constantly cueing belly breathing, breathe into your belly, breathe into your diaphragm, we're sort of implying that it's not that important to breathe everywhere else in your body. And I think sometimes we can even inadvertently create a new type of dysfunction or maladaptive pattern. If breath is movement, if breath is expansion, if breath is life, does it really make sense to limit our movement, our expansion, and our life force to just one area of the body? That's how you wind up with middle-aged people trapped in their bodies, unable to escape their old thought patterns, and still living from their childhood wounds. I would invite you to consider what functional looks like in your own life and in your own body, and maybe even consider where you could stand to be a little more flexible. If this concept resonated with you at all today, please let me know in the comments. We'll also dig a little bit deeper into this next week when we start to get into these psychophysiological aspects of breathing. It also means so much and helps the channel so much when you can like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.